Aziz, while I'm thinking about this, I do have a link to some of the files and things that I'm going to talk about, that if you would like to share it with people, you can. I just put it in the chat for you.
Yes, okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another online session. I hope you are enjoying your time with the March webinars. So the second webinar in March webinars will be with Dr. Theresa from the United States. So hi, Theresa. Happy to see you tonight. So the session will focus on the importance or the role of higher education in the life of teachers. You know that education is extremely important for teachers to grow both professionally and personally. And tonight's session will focus on that and on many other interesting things. So I will let Teresa introduce herself to the audience, to the Everyone Academy audience. As you know, our main mission is to bring educators together and to encourage online education and to help educators, help each other and grow. So welcome again, Teresa.
Hello. So my name is Dr. Theresa Cullen, and a little background on myself. I am a department head and professor of curriculum and instruction at Arkansas Tech University. And my background is that I teach teachers how to use technology with kids, is my area of interest, and I work on computer science education and also access to science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education, especially for girls and others that may not be in those careers as much. So my background is kind of focusing on those different areas, but as a department head, I end up talking a lot about how we can make better relationships with higher education. And I'm glad that he gave me that intro that is about forming better relationships, because that's kind of my focus today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and then talk as we go. There is one point where I'm going to ask some questions, and we'll relay that. Maybe I can kind of brainstorm with you a little. Sorry, let me hit this right button. And so first, let me just kind of say again, our topic is role of higher education in the daily lives of teachers. And I think a lot of times when we leave higher education, I spent a lot of time reading about the educational system in Morocco and about how you major in like math or science, and then you get a 1-year kind of certificate in teaching, which is very similar to what we do here in the United States. For our secondary majors, they pick their area of content. Those would be people teaching in our high school level, and then they take about a year of coursework with us. Our elementary teachers take all their classes pretty much with us, and we focus on all the major learning areas, reading, math, social studies, science, and we cover those all here in the College of Ed. So, but we spend a lot of time trying to give teachers opportunities in order to better themselves as they're learning to be a teacher. But a lot of times we don't see them once they graduate. And so one of the things that's really keeping us from growing is, we'll talk all the time to our students that education is about lifelong learning and how we're going to constantly be learning. But it actually goes from birth until death. But if our goal of education is always to be learning, one of the things is we actually keep ourselves from growing, partially because we divide education into silos. We talk about elementary school and secondary school. And we actually don't talk to each other when we get between higher education and K-12 education, is what we call it in the United States, from kindergarten through 12th grade. So it really keeps us all from growing into our full potentials because we don't talk to each other and we face similar challenges. So this is the question portion that I wanted to see if I could get some insight. What kind of challenges are you currently facing in your classrooms in Morocco? And I don't know if you could maybe share those with me, or if you could just summarize some of the problems yourself to kind of give me something to work from.
Yes, we will wait for 1 minute to see the comments, maybe.
Okay, in the comments, great.
If there are any comments, because people are just joining the session. Do you mean challenges related to the English teachers in high school or in
More
university?
about like, what are challenges that you face in just trying to teach in high school? Yes. What are some of the challenges that you have that you wish you had help to address?
Well, I can say that one of the challenges is maybe we keep teaching and students keep forgetting, especially grammar structures. So also the learners don't have exposure to English when they go outside the classroom. It's not the only exposure is inside the classroom, and teachers are having a hard time to to make them master the language. So what especially in writing, especially in speaking. I'm not talking about all the students, but this is the thing with most of the students.
Okay. Also, do you have difficulties with students kind of seeing where they're going, like what they're doing to prepare for university, as sometimes students kind of have a disconnect between the preparation they need to be doing to be able to go to university?
Yes, that's also another problem. Students, I feel that some of the students don't really know what they are going to do in the university. They are clueless. I'm talking about what major they are going to follow or to pursue.
Absolutely. And then also, my understanding is from what I've been reading, that in Morocco there is technology being used in the elementary and secondary schools, the elementary and the high schools, and that you probably use technology, especially during COVID, relatively well. Yes.
Yes, yes, of course. We use technology. I am talking about myself. I use a learning management system called Edmodo. So I created the classrooms for students. I share the lessons in the form of a PowerPoint presentation. Okay. So I also award my students badges I'm using Edmodo.
Awesome. Okay, so those are some of the challenges that you might be currently facing in your classrooms. And if some more things come up in the chat, you can kind of let me know. Okay.
Yes, of
Let me,
course, I will pass it.
okay, so let me tell you about some of the current challenges that higher education is facing. One of the things that I always find so funny dealing with from people from all over the world dealing with higher education is they'll sometimes come to me and they'll go, I'm thinking about having students do projects. We could do project-based learning or problem-based learning, and it's a revolutionary idea, and I'm going to change how everybody does things. And I think to myself, elementary and high schools have been doing that for a decade, for 20 years. But in higher education, I had, last year, we had someone come to campus and he goes, I hear you have a smart board here that you can touch and you can write on the board and it's digital. And I went, yeah, elementary and high school students have, high school teachers have been doing that for years. So one of our challenges is that we have trouble coming up with engaging ways to have students actively engaged. We also have issues with how do we keep students from getting COVID, of course. We have the challenges of how do you represent different kinds of learning online that maybe we more traditionally did as a lecture. A lot of faculty have difficulty understanding how students learn and what skills they have. They just make a lot of assumptions about students and what they'll be able to do. We also have problems with teachers just being burnt out, which I'm sure you have in K-12 setting as well. And so how do we make teachers feel supported and recognized for all the extra work they're doing? And probably the largest global challenge that we have is that we have less students being born and going to college. In the United States, there's a lot of companies, including Apple and Google, who said, you don't need a college degree to work for us anymore. And so there's a lot of students who are choosing not to go to college. And then also in 2008, when we had our recession, people had less babies. And so we know that in the next 5 years, we're going to have a lot less students coming to our universities. And that is freaking everybody out in the United States. All the universities are having meetings, trying to decide what we can do. And they don't really have an answer. We always have an ongoing challenge is that in order for us to do research, we need people to participate. We have projects and different activities. Some of them are professional development. Some of them are understanding how people learn, but we often have difficulty getting people to complete them. And then I've spent a lot of time reading about in Morocco about the strategic vision, about the changes that are in place for higher education up through 2030 by the EU and your Ministry of Education. And what I found very interestingly is that it seems like K-12 education went through that several years ago, and that you may have had experiences with that kind of alignment. Is that, would you say that that's, I'm getting that correctly from what I'm reading?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And so, you know, a lot of times we're in these silos, and hopefully you'll see that some of the challenges that are being faced in higher ed are similar to the challenges that are being faced in K-12 education. So there's lots of different things that higher education could offer you as a teacher. One thing is that universities and colleges have a lot of experience with online learning. So as you're making the transition to using things like Edmodo or Canvas or Moodle in order to teach online, there are people at a university who have done this for a long time. And so they may be able to assist you and give you ideas. There's also a lot of opportunities to share your knowledge with future teachers. I know that since I teach in a college of education, my students love guest speakers. They love people coming and talking about how they run their classroom. We had a video that we watched with a teacher showing us her organizational system for all of her classes, and my students went absolutely bananas. They were like, oh, I could do that. I could have a classroom like that.
Yes.
They are absolutely dying to be able to imagine themselves as a teacher. And so that's a great opportunity for you to help support the growth of new teachers, but also share your experience and feel recognized yourself. There's lots of opportunities. Do you all use Flipgrid in Morocco? Do you know that tool?
Flipgrid is not popular. I don't think it's popular in Morocco. I'm
Okay.
not sure if it's popular.
Well, what that
It's a
is
great,
like
it's a great technology. Yes.
yeah, it's like a video discussion board. But one of the things that I've used that for in the past is for international exchanges, where I have my students talk to people in other countries to understand how education is in different countries. It's a great way for a student to leave a video for each other so that they can share their experiences. So there was a study that was done quite a while ago in the 90s in the United States. And it was about how students envision themselves and how they are able to see themselves in a career. And they talk about it as proximal development. So for example, I'm 46 years old. If I went and I talked to a group of 20-year-olds, they go, oh, you're so old. You're the age of my mother. I don't have anything, like they don't have anything to say. But if I bring in a 25-year-old, they say, oh, this person really has some ideas. They understand what my life is like. I understand. So when you have students who are struggling to understand college life, one of the best things you can do is contact your local university or a university anywhere in your country using technology like Zoom in order to have some students talk to your students about what their life is like in college. And the study that was done many years ago looked at fashion magazines that are read in the United States. And at the time we had a magazine called 17 and it was, everybody said, well, 17-year-olds read it. That wasn't true. 12-year-olds read it because they wanted to know what it was like to be 17. And 17-year-olds wouldn't touch it. 17-year-olds wanted to read an adult magazine for 20-year-olds because they wanted to see themselves in the future. And so when we talk about student development, it's really useful to bring in people who are just a few years older than your students to help them to understand. They also have different priorities, which as adults we might find trivial, but to them are really important. Recently, I had someone come and visit the university with their high school student, and they wanted them to get excited about college. And they said, oh, could we attend a lecture? Or, could we, meet with a professor? And I said, how about we go to the cafeteria? And they said, that's strange. I took the student there and she was so excited because of the cafeteria and the food. She's like, I could go to college here. Now, yes, her priorities were a little wrong, but the idea was she was excited to see what life would be like and how they could experience the college life. And so beyond the academics. Professors also read a lot. And I shared with our facilitator some links to some articles that I was reading about higher education in Morocco. And the one thing is that professors and higher education are always reading new research, but sometimes they lack the experiences to relate it to how it would relate to your classrooms. So something that they could offer is the new research and the ideas that are on the cutting edge, but maybe what they would need is some practicality from you in the classroom. A perfect example is right now I've been studying virtual reality, wearing virtual reality headsets to learn, for people to learn things like how to fix engines and other types of practical skills, because during COVID, you can't be in a room working on that together. The truth of the matter is I can tell you a lot about the research and what should be involved in it, but what I need is a classroom teacher to tell me, how do you go about teaching that kind of a skill? I personally can't fix a motor, so I need that teacher to give me that aspect. There's a lot of opportunities for professional development. Many university programs will offer workshops and different opportunities, even in the United States. For you, you'd have to get up in the middle of the night probably, but there are a lot of free workshops that you can look for like this, that you could take online. Another thing is that university students are often looking to show that they have given service to others. And so a university can provide tutors for your students. A lot of students are looking for opportunities to volunteer in schools. And all you need to do is contact a university and say that you would like to have some volunteers for your classroom. And usually they're very willing. There's also the opportunity from higher education for you to find out what they are looking for. By having a regular line of communication with higher education, you will be able to tailor your curriculum to make your students the most competitive. So for example, for me, when people talk to me about that with future teachers, I say, I'm looking for students that have volunteered working with children. I want to see someone who's worked at a camp or someone who's worked in an after-school program, something so that those students stand out as comparison to others. And so many high school teachers take that and provide those opportunities. And then also professors get credit. For example, I'll put on my Vita that I had this conversation with you. And so it's a great opportunity for you to invite them as guest speakers. And once we're past COVID, possibly a field trip. The thing to remember that's most important is that students are trying to see where they're going to be in a few years. And so if you use higher education as an opportunity, you can help students to project where they're going to be and to help them in order to develop kind of the cognitive plan towards their next goal. So I touched on this a little bit, but the issue is that opportunities, you have a lot that you offer to higher education. The first is an opportunity for students to communicate with professors and let them know what they're learning in elementary and high school. One of our greatest problems is that many of our professors haven't changed the way they've taught for 20 years, but the elementary and high schools have. And so I've had several professors reach out to me to say, can I understand how students are learning math now? Because they don't seem to understand the way I'm teaching it. And there's a lot of things that are really great in elementary and high schools that we could really learn from in higher ed. We are always looking for people to participate in our studies and provide us opportunities to spend time in your classroom. We know that by watching classrooms, we become much better. I have a friend of mine who teaches in Las Vegas, which is on the other side of the country, but he teaches in a very, very urban school, which is very unlike where I live. And so whenever I happen to be in that part of the country, I will spend the day in his classroom. It helps me to see how students are learning, how I might be able to incorporate some of his strategies with my higher education students and help me to make a better connection. Higher education is often referred to as a silo or the ivory tower. And one of the issues is that we don't have good connections with the community. You as classroom teachers have amazing connections with the community. And so that is something that you offer to higher education. In addition, higher education sometimes needs a sounding board for new ideas from somebody who understands teaching but has an outside perspective. And then finally, there's a lot of learning technologies that you are learning in K-12 education that, from everything I read, are really kind of revolutionary for higher education in Morocco. And so some of what you're learning about how to teach, especially using technology, would be of amazing benefit to the universities in your country. Uh-oh. See, there we go. So the one thing that I wanted to point out is a lot of times, at least in the United States, our relationships with university, our relationship as university is somewhat parasitic. What we do is we go to schools and we say, we need our students to do field experiences with you. We need our students to be able to get internships and practical experiences with you. We need you to graduate really smart students to come to our university. We need you to send us students. And it's not a very symbiotic relationship. And so we don't want to be like worms on a bug. We want to instead really work on mutually beneficial relationships. When we think about like a bee and a flower, you know, the flower depends on the bee to pollinate it, and the bee depends on the flower for food. And so that creates a very symbiotic relationship where both benefit. And there are so many opportunities for both to benefit. One of the things that I've found from my teachers that teach in K-12 settings is they often feel a little intimidated by the people with the doctorates, and they don't want to, say, hey, I need this or I need that. But understand that the best relationships are those where both people benefit. And so there's a lot of opportunity where if they need something from you, you could also say, that's great. Send some students to our school. Also, would you offer us an online workshop about something that we would like to learn about? That makes perfect sense. So the call to action would be, how could you connect with higher education in your community? And I don't know if maybe you can present that question to the group and see if some people have some ideas about where those connections could be made. Are there any ideas coming in?
You mentioned the idea of practicality. So do you think research papers don't target what is happening in the classroom, in the actual problems that are faced in the classroom? Because I see the classroom as a laboratory where ideas are experimented, where do you think those research papers are separate entities from what's going on in the classroom?
Yes, I would say, I think that there's an area of research called the scholarship of teaching and learning, where people publish about what works in the classroom and how you can better help people learn. And it depends a lot on learning sciences, talks about how we can address people's ways of learning and ways of remembering and applying information, and then trying different tactics to see which are the most effective. And there is publication about that, but often it's not focused on K-12 classrooms. It's sometimes focused on, I was reading a study the other day, and it was about medical students. And they were talking about how an approach worked. And what they did is they had two really big lecture halls of medical students, and then they randomly assigned them, and they did like a random assigned experiment. And I thought, well, that's kind of ridiculous, because that's not actually how schools work. Students are with their classmates, they're in a school, they have a teacher. And so more studies need to be done in a classroom so that it's more relevant to practice, and that it could help students, help teachers to be more innovative in their work. I think also there comes a level of recognition when a university comes and observes your classroom. Some of my research has been about teaching the nature of science in K-6 classrooms, so the really young learners. And I'll tell you that probably the greatest benefit of that was not necessarily the curriculum and the activities that we were observing and seeing teachers teach, that we were teaching teachers. It was the respect for the teachers that, having been watched and written about, made them feel. That when somebody was actually saying, this teacher is doing something amazing and the students are learning, that kind of a narrative helps you to feel appreciated and recognized. And so by participating in research studies, your voice is out there. In the United States, we've had a lot of problems because teachers are paid so poorly. They're one of the lowest paid professions in the US. In Morocco, are teachers paid well, or is it a low paid situation?
Yes, it's the same. Yes.
So in the United States, in the state I was living in previously, Oklahoma, we had a lot of teachers who were leaving the state because our state, the United States, of course, is huge. And so our state, all the states that were around it, paid so much more, like almost twice as much. And so we had teachers that were leaving to go to other states. And so I did a study about why teachers were leaving. and their stories like broke my heart. They were like, my parents are elderly and I want to live close to them, but I can't afford to live and support my children at this wage. So I'm going to move 3 hours away and drive back to see my parents. But what they said to me when I did that work was that the most important thing is nobody had asked them. And what I found as a professor, and it was very kind of life-changing a little for me, is that while that's not considered the highest of research, experimental research, it really made a difference. I had some legislators enact a law based on my research. I had teachers feel like they were heard and valued, and that was very important to me as well.
So,
Do
Teresa,
we
do
get
you
any
think
other?
there is a,
Okay.
I was just wondering, do you think there is a gap between higher education or university in general and high school
Yeah.
in terms of the communication between high school teachers and doctors? Because as you said, some people or some teachers are intimidated by this by this titles, doctor,
Yeah.
professor. Do you think
I will
this is
tell
a
you,
problem?
oh, it is a problem. And I will tell you that one of the issues that we found was a lot of our more innovative high schools are going to project-based learning, where students for especially the sciences and some of the mathematics, that they're doing kind of group integrated projects where they're applying the math to everyday life. You know, they're they're solving problems with the math and science, and they're creating kind of these multimodal, which means like we're using lots of different technologies. So maybe they're creating a video that's explaining how, you know, this process works, or let's say it's about pollution. So they're creating a video explaining pollution to others. They're creating a website about what you can do about pollution. They're creating all these different things together, and they're working in teams, they're working in pairs, and they're kind of really developing like a really rich kind of experience. And then what happens is they've developed all these project-based skills, these 21st century skills of like collaboration and critical thinking. And then they come to the universities and we put them in a lecture hall with 1,000 students and tell them to memorize formulas and to do problems without any sort of relevance. What we found in the United States, and this may be different in Morocco, but the generation that's coming up, they care, they want it to matter. In a way that, you know, maybe my generation was, you were able to tell them like, sit down and memorize and do, but my students want to make a difference. They want to understand how they can apply what they're learning into a situation. So one of the things that my former university did is they hired me for a year to do a workshop for faculty to talk about how students are different 5 years from now than when we were talking. And what they said to me is, we want them to understand what's happening in K-12 classrooms, but because some professors might not be open to hearing what's happening in elementary and high schools, let's just talk about future students. And that's what we focused on. We focused on how teachers were getting away from that kind of rote memorization, that kind of worksheet mentality, and they were moving more towards these higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, where students were problem solving and comparing and contrasting and debating ideas in order to have them learn it on a much deeper level. And we really were trying to communicate with professors that the students may not have as much breadth of knowledge coming in when their teachers are really actively engaging them, but they have a much deeper knowledge. And so we've really been working with professors, especially in the sciences, on moving them from a very kind of memorization, kind of old school kind of approach, to move them more towards project-based learning. And in areas like medical school is a good example. Medical school for years has used case-based teaching, where when the students come into a class, they'll say, you have a patient, here's their situation, this is what their blood pressure is, this is what their temperature is, what are you going to do? But a lot of times in undergraduate, we prepare students to become doctors by having them memorize words and memorize phrases, and that doesn't make them good problem solvers. And so that's exactly what I'm trying to challenge people, is to reach out to the universities and let them know what you're doing different in your schools and how that is changing the student you are producing, and what kind of skills the students are coming with that maybe students didn't in the past, and how professors could make use of that, how professors could help students build deeper knowledge, but also so that they're not expecting a student to come who's memorized a lot of information.
Yes, it's interesting.
Are there any
So
other
you also
ideas?
mentioned the future self. You
Say
also
again?
mentioned that the future self, this is for motivation. You also said that high school students should connect with university and through maybe online projects. This is good for motivation to see themselves in the future after
Yes.
10 or 5 years.
Another idea too is if you could find some students in your community that could volunteer. And they don't have to be future teachers. These could be like future scientists or whatever. If you had a project
Yes.
to assign one of those students into the project group with students so that they could be advisors and mentors to your students, you know, it's still your classroom, you're still a teacher, but that level of letting students say, oh, so if I go to college, I'm going to think this way, or I'm going to be able to learn about this, and give them opportunities to interact. It can be very powerful, especially for students who are struggling to see the relevance of what they're learning.
Yes.
Other questions?
You also mentioned something a little bit alarming. You said that some students choose not to go to college because some companies like Apple and Google, they don't, they don't, have a,
A requirement.
college degree in their as a requirement. Yes.
And that, I think, in some ways goes to this disconnect, because there are high schools that are producing students who have a lot of these, 21st century skills. We're talking about critical thinking, collaboration. I'm forgetting my other two C's here. Come to me in a second. But the students are already learning how to work in that kind of collaborative environment that a company like Apple or Google is looking for. And so what they see is that it might be valuable for them to get a student who is still very malleable, who can still be formed into what they're looking for. So if they find a very bright student who only has a high school diploma, that they can come and teach them to work in the ways they're looking to work. One of the criticisms of higher education is that our model of teaching and learning is not matching what businesses are looking for.
Yes.
Like they want people to have flexible kind of thinking. They want people to be able to apply to new situations. And in higher education, a lot of times we are lecturing, and lecturing does not help those students develop those skills. So if you're doing that at a high school level, then there are some students who will maybe try to jump out of college. The most heartbreaking thing, a few years ago, I had a former student of mine who had come to work on a second degree with us. And he took a semester of a master's study in education, and then he dropped out. And so I took him out to lunch and I said, tell me why you dropped out. I said, you're very, very bright. You have some amazing ideas. I really think you having a master's degree would be good for your career. Like, why'd you drop out? And he said, I was afraid I would lose all my creativity if I finished the program.
Wow.
That it was teaching, and it hurt my heart. I thought, oh my goodness, like that is not what you want people to say. And higher ed is, we sometimes refer to it as like a cruise ship. It doesn't turn quickly. And so we are starting to work on those problems. But the truth of the matter is I spend time in a K-12 classroom, and then I come to the university and I show faculty some of the things that are just everyday processes in a K-12 classroom. And they're like, wow, what magic, because it isn't what we're talking about. And so I want you to realize that by partnering up with a university and inviting them to come and see what you're doing, you might be really helping them on their professional development, as well as getting recognition for all the work you're already doing. If you're in a workshop like this, you probably are already doing amazing things in your classroom.
You mentioned partnerships.
So something I am not sure works the same in Morocco as it does in the United States, and you might have to straighten me out. So in the United States, our government often will give money to higher education to do research, but we have a requirement in order to work with schools like K-12 schools, elementary and high schools, in order to increase the number of students that are majoring in science and technology. And so when we get money from the government, sometimes we are required to find a local K-12 school in order for us to either give workshops for the teachers or for us to develop lessons for them. But often, I often get calls from faculty saying, I don't know any schools. I don't have any connections, unless it's their own children's school. And so there's always opportunities with money funded through our government and also through private foundations where we need to show that connection. And it helps both because the school gets free professional development and the university gets the opportunity to complete their research. Does your government require that kind of relationship when they give money for special projects?
Yes, some of them do.
Yeah. I think probably one of the best things that schools could do is reach out to the university and just say, we are open to this. We would love for us to develop a partnership. Could we have a meeting? Could we talk? We're looking for, but think about what you want from it so that it's a symbiotic relationship. So what do you want? Do you want professional development? Do you want students to volunteer to tutor? Do you want students to come and speak to your classes? Those are all things that you should think about before you meet with the university so that you can say, when they say, oh, we need someone, to help complete our research, or we need, to be able to send people in so that we can tell them about our university so that they'll go to school there. And then you say, that's great, we'd be happy to do that, but these are what we need. And I think that that's probably the greatest challenge, is to say to the university, what is it that would help us solve the problems we're experiencing? And how could you be part of that?
Yes.
So I provided a link to a Google Drive that can be shared with you, where I just had read several articles about Moroccan higher education. And what I found from reading all of these is, and most of these are from 2017 or later, is that higher education in Morocco is at a crossroads, that they are being called on by the EU to change what they're doing, to be more project-based, to be more student-centered, to be more active learning, where the students are not just memorizing and taking tests, that they're also creating projects. They have so much for you. They have so much to learn from you. And what you're doing already as innovative educators in a K-12 school is something that can help them to better reach these goals and help them to meet the needs of the strategic plan that they have for the educational system. Well, I kind of left it open for questions and open discussion. I apologize. I hadn't realized that we weren't all going to be in the same Zoom together. I know that we've already been, I always find that the questions and open discussion is the most interesting part of any presentation. The The one other thing is, I don't know how much your like your professional development study is working on, but I would also really highly recommend, if you haven't read it, there's a book, it's actually quite old and you can find it online. It's called How People Learn, which talks about kind of the cognitive spaces of active learning and how to have how students' brains change when they're allowed to learn in new and active ways. And I can actually send the link to you as well. It's a lovely book that is, you know, we talk about in research, what we call seminal articles. Basically, it's a book that read all the things that have been published in the last 50 years about how people learn and how we can do better to help students become experts. And they wrote it all into one book. And so it's like this kind of like, I recently gave it to a virtual reality researcher and said, so we're talking the same language. Could you read this? These are the people you should know. And he's like, this thing is blowing my mind. This is amazing. And, you know, that's another really great benefit of higher education, is that since we're reading all the time, we can often suggest things with a specific question or a problem. We can say, these would be great things to read. But that book, How People Learn, is probably an amazing way to learn a lot about what people are paying attention to with learning theory and how people learn.
Yes, good. You said it's called Cognitive Spaces, right?
No, it's called How People Learn. I'll send you the link to it because it is free
Okay.
online.
Okay, good.
Well,
I have a little comment on the you mentioned that you in the United States the government fund projects or partnerships with schools, right?
mhm.
Okay, and one of the requirements of funding is to you know that you do research and the schools benefit from the workshops, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, what do you guys do concerning the how do you measure the impact of the workshops, and what kind
So,
of workshops you do?
okay. So, I mean, there's lots of different ways that we measure. But a lot of times we are focusing on like a pre and a post test, like a knowledge test, where we look to see if the teacher's knowledge has increased. But also,
Oh,
we look additionally, though, at teacher attitudes towards a subject. So I'll use the research project that was a grant funded project on the nature of science. And so what we did is we looked at teachers' attitudes towards teaching science in the lower grades. And what we found is that teachers were reluctant to teach science because where we were in the United States, they didn't test over science. They only tested over reading and math. And so they said, why teach about science? And so what we did is as we started interviewing them at the beginning and we looked at their misconceptions about how science works, then we were able to develop workshops specifically about how to use literature and reading to teach science. And so we met with the teachers once a month and we interviewed them. Then we also observed their classroom and also looked at their lesson plans. And what we were able to show is that that the teachers were teaching more science after they worked with the university. And then we were also able to go back to them 8 years later, and we were able to find that the teachers were still teaching science, even though their principals and their superintendents told them not to because it wasn't tested. And so we had given them strategies in order to do it, and we had helped them to develop enough confidence. We spent a lot of time looking at self-efficacy, and a lot of research projects that look at especially teaching higher level topics that are very difficult to teach focus on having teachers develop their own self-efficacy to feel confident to teach more complicated workshops. And we have a variety of surveys and interview techniques that we would use to do that. But as a whole, what happened in the United States is we have the National Science Foundation. And they were right, you know, they had all these grants and people were giving money to universities to do research. But when the grant would run out, if they made resources or what have you, you know, oh, the money's gone, we're going to turn the servers off, it's over. And all that knowledge was lost. And so the US government has decided that when they give money to someone to do research, that they should be spending part of it to mentor younger learners. So sometimes it's K-12 and sometimes it's undergraduate. We have a program throughout the United States that's called Research Experiences for Undergraduates. And what it is if somebody gets a very large grant from the National Science Foundation, then they are required to have several very young students work in their labs so that they're learning how to be scientists as well. And they're starting to show that since they've had that requirement, we have more people going into the sciences. And then, of course, we've had problems with people who are minorities, people who are African-American or Hispanic to go into sciences. We've also had issues with women not going into the sciences. And since they've done that, where the researchers have to be able to reach to try to encourage other people to follow in their footsteps, those numbers have gone up slightly. And so it has paid off.
So Teresa, yes, that was really interesting. So I would like to ask you about, have you recently, do you have any, do you think maybe of publishing any research papers? And if yes, what? Yes, do you think of publishing in research papers, and what are the topics that mainly interest you?
Okay, so my most recent things that I've published is I did a paper. I've done a couple papers recently about teaching computer science in K-12 classrooms. And what I've been stressing in those papers is looking at how we can pull in industry partners, people that are working at companies like Google and Microsoft, into how we are teaching so that students can see that career growth, that they can see what kind of job that they'll be doing. I also have been writing about applying some business approaches. There's one that's called Agile, which is where instead of doing very, very large projects, you break the projects into small sprints and you complete them, and then you communicate back with a client. And so that what I've been writing about is how K-12 teachers can model those kinds of business processes in the way that they manage projects in schools, because that will help them to be able to do that, to be able to develop those skills that those companies are looking for, even at an early age. I think sometimes we forget to focus on what we call soft skills, how people work together, how they problem solve. We're focused on them learning the content and perhaps memorizing things, and we're not focusing on the how do you use that information to solve problems. And so I'm doing work on that. I have another study, which is really relevant, that we're getting published now, that was looking at how parents control technology use in their homes and how they expect teachers to control technology at school. And what we found is that many parents had very strict rules for how their students could use computers and iPads and different technologies at home. And they had no idea how students were using technology at school, and had no idea how to help their student be successful at school, because they were more concerned about their students seeing inappropriate material. And so what we learned from that is that we really need to, when we're trying to make better use of technology in our schools, that the real challenge is not training the students, because they love to use technology and they adapt really quickly. They're not afraid to try things, but their parents are. And so our recommendations from that study was to do workshops for parents about how they could better help their students use technology, and how they could feel more confident in their technology use in order to have their students go further in school and be more successful using technology.
That's great. I know that you have a scientific background, especially in computer science and all these amazing things. What do you think? Maybe do you have a favorite learning management system?
Okay, so I actually counted and I have used 9 different learning management systems. So I've used a
Really?
lot of different ones. Yeah, I've used Edmodo. I'm currently using Blackboard, which is probably the worst. Um, I actually did a lot of workshops last year for a company called Canvas. Have you heard of Canvas in Morocco? Are people using that at all?
Yes, yes, yes.
I would say that that is the one that I like the best right now, and there's a reason for it. The reason is this, is the phone. Canvas is probably the best integrated for using on a phone. And I don't know if this is true in Morocco as it is in the United States, but our students use their phone more and more in order to do their work. And so when the learning management system does not work well on the phone, there are many students who don't have access outside of their phone. And so that's why I think Canvas is such a powerful tool. We had a thing happen last year at the university. A professor was giving a quiz during class, and she wanted the students to come with a computer and take the quiz during class so she could watch them and make sure they did not cheat. And a student came in with only a phone, and the professor threw the student out and said, "I told you to come with a laptop to take this test." And the professor came to me and they said, "You know technology really well, and this is what the student did. Can you believe that?" And I said, "Well, what was your test like?" And they said, "Well, it was multiple choice and it had 100 questions." And I said, "You should apologize to the student." And they said, "Well, why?" And I said, "You designed a test that's easier to take on a phone. It would be easier for me to do a multiple choice test on a phone than it would be to use a computer." And she said, but what if the student cheats? What if the student uses their phone to cheat?" And my answer to her was, I could cheat a lot better with a phone and a computer than just a phone. And what I really stressed to her was that, what we really need to do is design the activities that really leverage the technology, that make the students want to use the technology to the greatest level and to be successful. But we also need to, the other thing, especially I hope we've learned during COVID, is that we need to learn to trust our students. I see a lot of discussion amongst professors that they're worried about students cheating, and that's partially on us. We need to design activities that are unique enough that students can't cheat with each other. And we need to design things that are engaging enough that we don't have to worry if their camera's not on. And I hope that that is a lesson that we learned from COVID, that we have a responsibility to make our lessons appropriate and useful for students so that they will feel challenged and they will feel engaged, and that they're going to, that cheating isn't an option because it requires them to think too much, and that there's no benefit to it. And I think a lot of what is going on in K-12 schools with students working together on projects are things that higher ed could really learn from you.
Yes, great. This is great. I agree. Assessment and it is always an issue, especially online assessment. Teachers are always, trying to find ways to not to make sure that students are not cheating.
Yes. So since your audience is teachers of English in Morocco, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So I will tell you, like, I'm going to go back to Flipgrid. One of my favorite tools. You asked me, what's your favorite tools? Flipgrid, I really would recommend that teachers check this out, because what Flipgrid is like a discussion board that's done in video. And so what you can do is they have a whole series of exchanges that they have. So a couple different ways that I've used it. I have some friends that live in Italy and a friend here who teaches Italian. And so I was able to have the students like ask them questions on Flipgrid because of the time difference. And then my friends were able to answer them in Italian so that the students would get practice answering and asking questions in Italian. And I also have done some exchanges with India where I've had my students just interact with students that are K-12 students in India, telling them what it's like in the United States. And that was truly for the students in India to get practice on their English, and for my students to understand the global nature of education. Flipgrid has all these different ways that you can connect like that. And so if you're teaching English, there is often classes in the United States. I would also say that, you know, Arabic is growing to be much more popular in the United States as far as a foreign language goes. And so there might even be opportunities where there was a class in the United States that we're looking for students to practice Arabic with, and they would love to be able to practice English with your students. And since
You
it's all
speak some
done,
Arabic.
oh, go ahead.
You speak some Arabic.
Yeah. So I didn't catch that. You cut out for a second. But yeah, I just think that I really would encourage you to go and check out Flipgrid, and it's free. And it's free around the world. And if you want, since I have your contact information, I can send you some more information on it.
Yes, thank you. So this will be great. So do you have any final tips maybe for teachers to teach successfully online, for teachers also who are thinking of designing their online courses, or for teachers also who are thinking of ways to better assess their learners?
Okay, so I would say there's two things, because I'm currently teaching a class on designing online learning. I would say the first thing is always focus on the objective and the assessment. I mean, that's the most important. And when you write your objective of what you want students to be able to do, be thinking about the assessment, and then make sure your activities help them to get there, you know, like scaffold them. I would say that would be one thing. I would say the other thing is, okay, so there are so many technologies. And when COVID hit, there were a lot of companies that partially were being nice and partially were trying to get you to use their tool and to depend on their tool so that you would buy it. One of the things that I hear from teachers is that they feel constantly like they'll learn something and then someone will say to them, oh no, you shouldn't be using this. This is so much better, and make a different choice. And I feel a lot of teachers have told me they're constantly chasing the newest, greatest thing or the new idea. And what I always tell teachers is it doesn't matter if the technology is old, if you're using it well. And if this is how you like to do things and you have it all figured out, then there's no need to switch if it's working for you. And you're not giving the students a better learning experience by switching all the time. And so, like, for example, if you use iPads, there's a lovely tool that's called Explain Everything, where a teacher can write on it and record themselves writing on it, and it's fabulous. But other people, there's other tools like EduCreations and Nearpod, and people are always saying, oh, why do you use this? You should use this instead. If what you've got is working for you, stick with it and learn it really, really well, because knowing it well will make you more comfortable and let you use its full capacity. For 7 years, I ran a one-to-one iPad initiative, and they were always pressuring us to buy a brand new iPad Pro, like the nicest iPad. They wanted us to give all the students like the nicest iPad. And my answer was, until we're using at least 50% of the possibilities with this device, we have no need to buy something more expensive. That what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're learning it as deeply as we can and using it as fully as we can before we need to go to look for something else.
Okay, great. Do you have a final message to professors in order to collaborate with the high school to bridge the gap between high school and university?
I think for professors, I think it's important to be open to it. And for high school people that want to try to set that relationship, I would say, don't give up if you're not successful your first time. because I I was doing like a fitness walk to raise money for a charity. And I was walking with this other woman, and she said to me, I really would like to study instructional design, but the university that you're teaching at doesn't have it. And that's what I teach. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she says, yeah, I called somebody and they said that I can't study that there. And I thought, so she had given up and she hadn't talked to anyone else. And I just happened to meet her at a charity. And I thought to myself, how many people have we lost because they called the wrong person? So don't be afraid to try. I'm a department chairperson, a department head. And so often look for those kinds of people. And also another place to call is if the university has people that help people apply to the university, tell them that you have an interest and could they help connect you, because they're very good at connecting people, and they'll get you to the right person.
Okay, this is great. So any final word
I think
for
I'm
the
good.
Everyone Academy, for the Everyone Academy audience? Okay, so we come to the end of this session.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, I thank you so much for sharing your interesting ideas, and I will share all the documents that you have sent me here.
Yes,
With
and I'll add the how people learn into that folder, as well as a resource on Flipgrid. Okay.
Okay, so thank you so much, Theresa, and bye-bye.
Bye.